Hi there, I'm Michael West. I'm a playwright and translator and adapter, and I'm happy to be talking to Mark here for the Access Chats. How are you?
And Michael, we've been trying to put this together for the last 2 weeks, and with the Access building beginning to reopen, it's kind of, regular life has kind of started to pop back into so apologies for the many delays in this.
I'm not going anywhere.
Okay. Talk to me about Michael West as a young lad. Like, was writing always a thing for you? Was that kind of where you buried in books from an early age?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I've always thought of myself as that I was going to be a writer. I didn't know what now. And that's the classic thing, isn't it, when you're a teenager, that you'd be swanning around telling people you're going to be a writer. And I was in college before it ever occurred to me that I hadn't actually written anything. So there was a lifestyle and an access to cool that went with the word. But I still think in a way I think of myself as a writer first, and then the genre and the sort of the technical sides of how that comes out and how you get paid second. I think if you're interested in writing, you're interested in the whole thing, and it's just as mysterious now to me as it was then. But certainly I was a kid who read books. That was my thing, and I just somehow thought I'd be involved with it.
Yeah, I think that's hilarious. Kind of, you took on the mantle of. It's like, I suppose, in the music parlance, as being like, I'm a lead singer of a band that just haven't got a band yet, and
Yeah. It's exactly the same thing. Yes, exactly. You try on all these costumes throughout your formative years, and you see what fits, and some make you feel good, some embarrass you years later, but that one just always sat with me fine. And I don't think you are questioning these things, but like many kids, the reason that was that I used to be brought to the local public library as a kid, and I was one of those people who had to be told 10 times and pulled out of the place. And my mum left me there a couple of times just because she was too annoyed. And I was outraged at the idea that they wouldn't indulge because I wanted to read a book while I was there and then take out as many as you could as well. So I didn't want to, that stuff. But, and again, that's common for loads of kids. So my kids now, however, I'm amazed they can read. Technically I can see that they can, but they don't see reading as the thing it was when we were younger. We didn't have all these amazing other avenues for enjoying and consuming story.
Yeah.
For want of a better word, but I was always interested in, and I still am, again, like nonfiction, history, politics, philosophy. Like there's a sensual pleasure I have always got from the act of reading that is, I suppose, I just enjoy it.
Yeah. That's really interesting, that kind of sensual pleasure thing, because I've kind of teenagers as well, and like they have access to, as you say, a huge amount of stories and narratives in their life, but the books they read them over and over again, rather than kind of deep diving into a range of kind of other.
It's extraordinary. Yeah, it's a completely different way of interacting with story now, as you say. Like, the idea of when it's a story that found its way into Hamlet, actually, with Ollie when he was performing in it, but it's a story that came from my experience of our older son Thomas, who is now almost 20, but one of his favorite stories when he was being put to bed was, "Dad, tell me again what it was like when you were a child and you wanted to see a film." And the story was, well, if you wanted to see a film, you had to go and see it in a cinema, and then if you didn't see it, then you had to wait for about a year until it came on the television. And he said, "Yes, tell me about that part." And I said, "Yes." So at Christmas, a film would come on and you'd want to watch it, and then you and the whole family would have to agree to watch it at the same time and watch it. And he would just think this was, and he'd just say, "Yeah, tell me again. And he loved that story. He thought, like, that is the most bizarre idea in the world, because he's a kid who grew up watching The Lion King, as in watching it all the time, not.
Yeah.
And the idea of a one watch thing is very strange to people below a certain age.
Yeah.
And it is interesting, like some of the most formative things I would have seen as a kid, I would have seen once. And then, with kids, you would revisit some of them, and some of them are amazing and some of them are appalling, but like you haven't seen them for that entire intervening period. Whereas these kids now know, and it's very interesting as you talk about, like, the standard of storytelling available. The Pixar movies, for example, these kids now, having watched those things, know so much about storytelling and character and drama in a way that, you'd really have had to be putting the pieces together as a young one watching a few bit of Harryhausen movies for 20 minutes on on a Saturday morning.
But I think it's also it's interesting as well though, because when you do watch, I think I've been a similar age, and when you kind of watch something once, the level of detail that you remember because you're only going to get a chance to watch it once is kind of interesting. And now, like, my lads kind of watch stuff over and over again, but you kind of go, if they want to remember it, they go and watch it again rather than actually just remember it and talk about it. And I think there's something really interesting that and also I remember having this discussion stroke argument with my son a few years ago about Harry Potter and the Lord of the Rings. Like, when I was growing up, like, I was Frodo. Like, that was me in the guise of a hobbit. When I was reading that, it was me. And it wasn't. But now I'm wondering, when kids read those books, are they seeing the film? Are they kind of imagining the characters from the film as they're going through the journey?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's hilarious trying to put yourself back in those boots, as it were. And I remember when I was in college, a friend of mine saying to me, and this is before the internet now, that's how long ago that was, but he was just saying, TV is just something that parents worry about, and you watch as much as you can of, and then you get over it. And that sort of seemed to be like, that was a really sensible thing for a 20-year-old to say. Like, you couldn't have watched more TV, in our opinion, than ourselves. And I look back and go, like, we barely watched it compared to, like, it's like a permanent Zoom meeting now in the world, that the screens are everyone's absorbing. But anyway, there's something about that, because we just, I don't know, we'll see how it all pans out. But it's an extraordinary engagement with stuff. And I don't know,
Yeah. Come here, we digress slightly. In relation to you then, when you were leaving school, was it kind of, was there this kind of career versus interest or study, was there kind of a choice for what you were going to do?
Yeah, I mean, again, part of growing up is trying to find a language to express what you want to do, and you're handed this sort of identikit thing of careers guidance. So I would say, as a young teenager, I want to be a writer, and they'd say, a journalist, is it? And I go, no. But I didn't know what a career was. It didn't matter to me what I did. It was like I was going to write as well, or that's how I saw it. So that was great. That was like permission. I could be, I could be a farmer. I could be anything. Because I was going to write. That was the thing. So what happened was I was in a good school, and I was acting in plays, and again, I did all those things. And then I won a scholarship to a school in America when I was 16, and I went away for 2 years at a time, again, when it was very, very far away. So I was in a place in New Mexico, up the mountains, and that sense of absolute freedom to invent myself was an extraordinary thing. I'm like, you couldn't have gone further away from South Dublin than the Rockies and the desert and stuff. So I was there, and that's where I was really testing out the idea of, well, who do you want to be? And I was in this international school with all these other kids who, an incredible range of talent and interest and stuff. And the sense that you could be anything was the overwhelming thing. Now, again, I think most teenagers have that. But when I came back, then I went to college and I did drama and English. And what happened there really was, that was the meeting of the two things of having wanted to always be a writer. The drama thing sort of happened to me as just like a sudden shock of like, I shouldn't be doing that. I'd actually applied to do English and Russian in college to impress my parents with the seriousness of my contempt for anyone's opinion of anything. And I was accepted, and that was all fine. And, I'd read 2 Dostoevsky novels and a couple of other things. So I was going to do that. And then I arrived to the kitchen one morning, and my mother said, there's this course in college, Trinity, drama thing. And I was like, why am I doing that? And she said, oh, you can apparently apply. It's an interview thing or something like that. So luckily I was able to, fill out a chit that you change your mind. And I went in and I did an interview and I got accepted. But that was it. That certainty in that kitchen that morning was a revelation in itself of like, I have to be doing that. Everything else is ridiculous.
And where do you think that came from? I mean, was like, was there an interest in that before?
I think, okay, the simple answer was that it wasn't really offered as an option. So I was away for 2 years in America, and when I went into Trinity to do the drama course, it was the 3rd year of its existence. So it just wasn't a thing. I didn't think you could study. I had the same experience when I discovered about DYT. If I'd known that was a thing that you could do, youth theatre, holy shit, I would have been in like a shot. You did a play maybe once every 3 years in school, and that was my understanding of drama. I really enjoyed it, and I thought the whole thing, but I had no idea that there was a whole universe of that stuff. So yeah, so arriving into the shambolic, and again, Trinity, for all its faded glory, I mean, the drama centre was housed in a building that showed the great esteem that drama and the dramatic arts were held by that university. So we were in a derelict tenement on Westland Row that had to stop every time a dart went over because the windows all shook. And it was basically, I mean, it was a room that was, it was about the size of this room. That was the drama department. And there was a double door, and then the other side was the costume and set department, which was just Clodagh McCormick and a sewing machine, and whoever else was passing by. So it was extraordinarily dingy and shabby. It just happened to be full of some really interesting students. And that buzz of like, well, we're here to make plays somehow and to learn about them. And that was, loved it. I mean, I loved hating it, but I also loved it.
And was it kind of multi-part? Like, were you acting, right? Were you kind of doing a lot in there, or was it just writing you kind of focused on?
Yeah, I mean, it was early days in the department, so they were making stuff up. They still hadn't had a year to graduate, so there was a lot of, I mean, I imagine it was just chaos, but yeah, it was an academic part. It was part of a two-subject thing, so you did, half of your time was doing normal people college, like where you went to rooms with people who didn't talk, and that was English, and I really enjoyed that. And that was such a different world. I mean, I'm really glad I did both, because I loved English. I mean, that was my books thing, was how I got in. But the difference was extraordinary. I mean, the drama people, there was only about 20 of us, and we seemed to be together all the time in this incredibly intense, within a week, like we were already making stuff. Whereas the English people, there were people I didn't meet until my fourth year. It was the totally different worlds. So I thought quite healthy actually to shuttle between the two. But yeah, you had to do a bit of everything. So we did acting classes, which were amazing to work with. I never didn't know what that was. And then we did movement, and we had academic classes. We did stuff on medieval French drama. I mean, like it was all the things that you would expect. But mostly, I think the most important thing in those situations is that there were productions that were done in-house, and you had to be involved in some way. And that was always the sort of the framing, was that you're here to make plays and to learn about how plays are made, and puppetry and costumes. And, you could follow your nose in terms of what you wanted to do. And then, of course, there's players, which is sort of the rival thing. So you'd be doing that, just making shows. This stuff from university. And
come here to me, it's like, when you jokingly said a few minutes ago about kind of, being a writer and not having written, but obviously, you began to write. Was there a moment kind of when you started to write, even before that, you kind of went, oh, okay, I actually have the tools at my fingertips to kind of explore what I want to explore? Like, did you know that you could do it? Not necessarily quality-wise, but even technically.
I had a very high opinion of myself, all right, but I hadn't tried and I hadn't failed in any important sense. So I think my gateway into that was poetry. And I was studying creative writing in an extra class I was doing in this place in America. And there was a very interesting guy teaching it, and he was a prose writer. And we studied poems for the simple reason that you can read them in one go and look at them. And there's something about that, I think, again, that experience, that if you fall in love with books or writing in school, it's often through poetry, because you can do it in a class. You can, and a poem is a written object that you can hold in your hand. It's like a small, beautiful thing, or a shoe or something, but it's definitely an object. Whereas drama, I mean, novels are immersive worlds, and drama, I wasn't really sure what they are. I mean, like, I had enough of an experience that it was something between the book and the thing on the stage, that you had to learn it, and it went somewhere mysteriously internal and invisible, and then it appeared again. And I thought that was an extraordinarily strange thing, but I don't know how you would write that. And I watched, I hadn't seen a script, for example, other than the ones you're supposed to study, Shakespeare or something. But so what happened actually in college was I had done the interview, and I said I wanted to write, and I think that was a good thing to have said. And that at the time nobody seemed to be interested in that kind of thing. But I hadn't written anything, so I wasn't burdened by the difficulties of that. And then what happened in that first semester was John McCormick, who was running the drama department, said, "We'd like you to dramaturg a text." I'm still not sure what that means, but he said basically that they were going to do a comedy called La Casanova by Goldoni. So it's a Venetian, late 17th, early 18th century comedy. And the only version available was a Penguin Classics. absolutely turgid. And he said, so we need to kind of make it speakable. And so what happened was I said yes, and then I started being handed these reams of literal translations. So they employed an Italian woman who spoke into a dictaphone, and it was typed up for me, and it was, he comes in, he say, it was that kind of classic stuff, and I had to type it into speakable English, and I did that without thinking anything about it. But it was brilliant because, and I say this to anyone starting out, translating is a wonderful way into writing because I didn't have to come up with the name of the play. I didn't have to invent any action, the names of the characters, the locations. It was all done. You're literally just typing it. So I did this, and it was 70 pages, whatever, and it was performed, and that was all in the first semester. And I went home, I suppose, at Christmas, and I'd already had a play performed. Now, I hadn't written any of it,
Yeah.
but I had the experience of writing it because I typed it out. Yeah. So I knew, and I had that physical sense of like, that's how long a scene is. And there's something that was the moment for me that I went through the waterfall, as it were. And I've talked about this with other writers, and sometimes they say things like, the first story they ever wrote was something that they copied out, a Roald Dahl or a John McGahern or Alice Munro, whatever, like that that the act of physically transcribing a text is the first gateway into the feeling like you've written something, even if you didn't write it. You've come in contact with what that feels like in your body, and there's something about that because writing is a type of performance, and you have to believe the role, and you have to physically execute it. So I think that was a huge thing. So I suddenly was a writer, and I hadn't had to think about it, and I really, really enjoyed it, and I liked that triangulation of intention, thought, text, action, scene break, things like curtain lines, exit lines, entrances, idiolects, and all the problems of translation were something incredibly interesting to me, and things I'd never really thought about in my own life. Things like, the cost of things. So characters in plays are always wanting things, and they want to buy things or sell things, and what they use to perform this crude act of barter is through money. And you have guineas and gold coins and lira and sou, and it just suddenly struck me as like, it was a structural thing, I suppose, was exciting. I mean, this sounds very strange and arcane, but like those are really interesting translation decisions of like, do you want someone to say, I'll give you ducats or gold coins, or what's the least intrusive way of saying a lot of money? I don't even know. You'd have to look up, and it's, you read Chekhov or something, and you go, something is worth 3,000 kopecks, and you're going like, is it a cup of tea or is it an entire cherry orchard? Like, what's the exchange rate? So I found those things fascinating, and it, in a way, that was like a metaphor for what all drama is. It's like you're trying to find the exchange rate for what people want and how they talk to each other, and how small objects can become life or death moments. And that, as I say, the translation was the specific way that I had a handle on. That's what drama is. That's what it is. You name something that you want, and it gets taken away from you.
That's really fascinating. That kind of the exchange rate, that kind of metaphor of trying to find what it is. And you're right. You kind of it's similar to most crafts. Actually, there's a kind of, whether it be with an author beside you or with a cobbler beside you, with whatever, by actually making it physically, even if it's not yours, by actually that's a really interesting. But then, Michael, when you kind of moved into writing stuff often for yourself, was that kind of, I suppose, was that a leap into the unknown for you, or I suppose, and then having to show it to somebody?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, like in your head, you write brilliant things, but on the page, they tend to be a little bit more humble. And yeah, I mean, so the key for me in my own development was I know it's very strange introduction to drama. I don't think, again, I can't imagine how this would happen now. But like, why would you be writing or transliterating golden age Italian classic comedies? Like, that's such a bizarre thing. So I did a couple more of them. I did a French romantic drama called Lorenzaccio. I translated an absurdist play called Fando and Liz for Gemma Bodonets. So I was doing other people's plays. That was the first thing. So that was giving me the confidence that that's how long a play is, how long a scene is, and also I've done it. When I was at, then you put your name down and say you'll write something. When I was doing that, I found myself silent. Like, what is my language? What is my thing? What on earth? So I did start writing the great bourgeois comedy about an academic couple, basically, and something about an affair and tweed jackets. And I mean, I was probably 4 or 5 pages into this thing, and I just had an absolute sense of disgust and self-loathing. I'm 19. Like, who are these people? What? Like, who? I'm not, like, this is like a 1950s play for today. Like, what do I know about these? I know nothing about it. And it was a real shock to me that, you know, that this moment of freedom, that I could write anything I wanted, and I was doing this. It was something about like someone trying to dry their hair, and they were gonna. It was extraordinary. So I hit this wall, and it was a really simple thing. It was like, what is this? I know nothing about these things, and so I decided I would subtract anything I didn't know from the text. So I would basically say, well, I don't know anything about 40-year-old people who are married, so I won't write about them. I don't know anything about jobs in that sense, so I won't write anything about that. And I just took away everything I could take. So I don't know about set building, so I won't have any set. I won't. It'll obviously be acted by someone I know, so it'll be someone young. It'll be someone who's 19 or 20. Okay, that was like, oh, that's interesting. I said, I don't know anything about lighting, so we won't have any lighting. We won't. And so I literally just took all these things away, and I was going, now what do I have left? And I basically, I was looking at what I had, and I had nothing. I didn't even have a name of a character. I had he and she, and I was going, well, it's a start. And I didn't know how they would speak or anything. So what I wrote a kind of a dumb show where they just were messing, and that turned into Two Chairs anyway. But like, it was just the first play I'd written. And what is funny about that was, like, years later, I found an old computer, and I looked through it, and it actually worked and stuff. And I found the file that was the transition from the imagined writing life and when I started actually writing. And it was I would date it absolutely from, you know, that night, February 22nd, 1989. I found something which was to take away everything that was not me and just see what's left. And it literally was, it was just two young ones and two chairs. They were running around pretending to be chickens. And I laughed myself silly at that sense of like, that's something. So that was a great discovery, an accidental discovery.
But I mean, that play also emerged at a time when, you know, there was a lot going on in Dublin as well. You know, there was I suppose, one of our, you know, many upheavals in the kind of theatrical scene. There was things emerging, Fringe was emerging. There was an awful lot of new writers and new companies, and that play, you know, you kind of hit the ground running with it. I mean, that kind of got a response. That was, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like these mythical foundational events in your own life are really important. I mean, like, I have seen it done a couple of times, and it's mortifying. So it's like hearing your teenage diaries read out loud on stage, because I thought it was so free and risky and you know, sexually charged and all, and it's just. So I saw it once and thought, like, it's like a Christian drama group. You know, it's like that version of, it's so safe in its own way. You know, like, I thought it was the most radical thing you could possibly do. But then again, that was a young thing. So it was 89 when I did it, and of course a huge part of it was that Dominic West was in it, and literally anything that he did seemed really interesting. So I probably overestimated my ability a little bit, because he was able to just pop the thing. But it was a sort of and Mandy Hogan was the other actor, but that rehearsal period of trying to invent how you would do all that stuff was great. And yes, as you say, like, I don't know, you're supposed to have this explosion, you know, as you turn 20. You find some mates and you should just do things. And it's impossibly long time ago, but we had opportunities that were so uncomplicated compared to what they are now. I mean, like, nobody did plays. I mean, this is the really weird thing. Like, you know, I was involved in Players in Trinity, and the Irish Times reviewed them. Like, this is extraordinary. So they would do a play every week, sometimes lunchtime, sometimes evening ones and stuff, and they were part of the scene, because there was literally nothing else going on, you know. So you entered the ecology just by birthright, as it were. It just appeared, and no one questioned it. And similarly, when I did that play, I think Stephen Bradley had done a half-hour thing, but literally nobody had ever written a play since 1950. That's what it felt like, you know, like, you know, apparently Brian Friel was working, but it felt like another world, you know. So it was, you just had to go at something, and we knew absolutely nothing, and, you know, and yet you could still get a space and you could go on and stuff. So
yeah, no, it's and again, sorry, excuse me. In the years kind of after that, you obviously kept the translation, you know, the Tender Trap and the Don Juan and, you know, Tartuffe, and that over the next kind of few years. but also then alongside that, I mean, you were still directing your own work with Monkey and Sardines and stuff. You know, that kind of, there was two very, you know, not different tracks going, but there, you know, there was two, the emerging writer and the person with his foot very firmly in kind of the adaptation and translation of classics.
Yeah, I mean, you're always looking for, it's not quite the grass on the other side thing, but you're trying to have an inside and outside thing. So for me, the dialectic was I'm learning about classical theatre and reading Moliere or Marivaux or something, and then also doing this weird, fringy, mad stuff. And that for me was a very healthy sort of distance, you know, that you looked at one through the other and that you weren't only replicating, I don't know, deadly boring theatre, that you were trying to think of ways in which that they would talk to each other. But I mean, that is that was it. And then what happened was working with Annie Ryan, that the fact was that she was just better at directing. So that sort of squished that impulse, but it wasn't, it's all part of the same thing. It was just like, in a room, she's better at directing than me. So why would I go up against that? So this is when we started working on stuff together. But those things aren't evident in the sense that, like, you don't know how things are going to pan out. You're just following your instinct.
Yeah. And I mean, around those times, I mean, obviously having spoken to Annie as well, around those times, like the Corn Exchange kind of, you know, began to begin and develop and evolve. And also, I mean, like, you've a long history of working with that company, obviously, and with Annie, but also outside of that, I mean, you know, I remember it was probably around 2000, 99 that you did Jack Fell Down for
That's right, yeah.
Team, and nearly killed us all with the physicality of but I suppose being able to, and that's what became very interesting about your work was that immersion in the kind of story making, or, you know, that immersion in kind of the physicality of the vigor within the text, but also the vigor within the kind of performative space.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, I never really saw it as being a separate thing. I just thought there were lenses through which you would look at the same problem, which is, you know, bodies in space, words in the. So, you know, I was very happy to write plays, you know, for all my love of words and writing, I was very happy to write plays with no text. The opening section of Two Chairs, Monkey, Man of Valor, hardly any text, but there's a bit. But I've always loved that stuff, you know. But that's because, you know, for me, it's all part of a continuum with cartoons and silent movies, and the physical comedy of existence is bodily, you know, functions, I suppose. So I've always found that energizing to go between the high rhetoric of the text, and then the very base comedy of the body. And I think that's again, for me, that theater is it's the meeting place between those base impulses and the dream of the gods. And comedy is a brilliant tool for exploring that, particularly those, you know, that pull, you know.
Yeah. And did that, I mean, with say the Corn Exchange, and with kind of working with that aesthetic and working with Annie, that pushes your writing into certain places, or that you push that kind of that must be at the very beginning, I suppose, that must have been fascinating for the pair of you, you know, artistically, to kind of
it's like you're looking for that kind of conflict to generate forward movement, and it's not like, you know, when you're exploded in a world like that, the comedy thing, it's not like it's going to make your writing better. It doesn't have that thing. It's like the thing is something other than that. It's the show is the thing that you're moving towards, whether you're contributing it through performance, directing, writing, lighting, costume. But the focus is that, and that's helpful. And like Declan Donnelly's excellent book, The Actor and the Target, is very good on that. But like, as a sort of basic metaphor, that, you know, where you turn your intention is where the good stuff comes. But if it turns back on you, in other words, if you become the object of your attention, then you hit a block. So, you know, and he talks about specifically in terms of acting, that if an actor says, "I'm feeling this is difficult," or "I don't," you go like, now you've made yourself the object here. You know, you've got to align yourself. So I think it's that as much as anything I learned was, you know, you talked about the craft element earlier, and it's, you can write the most beautiful sentence in the world and someone can say it, but does it work? It's a whole other thing when you put it into the space. Like, and what does work even mean? You know, is it a sad line? Is it a funny line? Is it doing anything to anyone? So it's a relentlessly practical medium, theater. I mean, as I say, was referred to as like, it's a blunt instrument of the entertainment industry. You don't know until you put it in front of an audience if it works at all. And the effects that you can create are, they're quite complex and subtle, but also, how long is this going to take? It's a very, there are limits here to people's attention and indulgence, and you've got to be able to make things happen and then move on to the next thing. And so anything that you do will teach you that. It doesn't actually matter what format you're using. It's the awareness of like, I'm bored now. How do we make this exciting and not horrible?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny having, and just focus on it for a second, having worked on both sides of, say, Jack Fell Down, having been in it, and then in the remount, directing it, or not the remount, new production. Yeah. It's fascinating, I think, you're always in that kind of theatre and education, or theatre for young people, space. What I think that play captured, brilliantly, was the sense of drama to bring it into a workshop. So to explain, the characters make up this fictional character, and make up the idea that everything they say is real and can't be changed, and they bring this character on a journey, and then they kill him by mistake, and then they have to go into a child's classroom and try and figure out what the hell are they going to do, and they can't, do a Marvel movie and exhume him, or But I think that dilemma, and you mentioned about being bored, about the attention span. I mean, that was, it was really interesting from both sides of it to work within that space on something that was, highly textual, but also highly physical, and was very much towards the target. It was very much young people were in Sabine's gorgeous tent. But I suppose taking that into your other work, that's a very precise, space, but that does exist in all your work, and I think that's what makes it kind of, again, to go back to that word you meant, that kind of visceral or kind of sensual piece. And is that something, because you've translated stuff or adapted stuff ranging from, Lolita to the Marriage of Figaro to, but searching for that muscle, or that, in the language, that kind of, that guttural physical, is that something that kind of, I mean, how do you go about that?
Again, seat of the pants stuff. I mean, you look at, the truth of working in this business is that you do most of the things that you do because you're asked to do them. Like someone comes along with money or a building or an invitation, and this is why it's so hard to break into it. So, and you have to kind of apply yourself across the board in all directions. You've got to do self-motivated, self-promoted work. You've got to make yourself available to be employed. You're trying to do all those things. So there's absolutely no sense that there's a career or a path or an agenda in any of this stuff. So what happens is you do a lot of accidents, and then you start to try and find your way through it. But I think, as I say, I found it very helpful to be flipping between the translations. I think because, again, quite frankly, like no one was going to stage my work. Even Pigsback, as they were then, weren't interested in staging the plays by me. They were interested in doing a Moliere or something. And that was, so it was a way to get, to offer a writer a window into the business, for which I'm eternally grateful. But that's why it was helpful. It's like I was an actor in the sense, like you're borrowing the cloak of a proper writer. So that was very helpful. And I think you're looking to, I don't know, and for example, the Tender Job you mentioned, I worked with Michael Murphy. And so to be in a rehearsal process with someone of that extraordinary physical talent was really interesting, and it confirmed a lot of my instincts in terms of like, well, go further. What is he responding to in the text? What are the ideas that he can make shimmer and move around? And they're not always the things that you think about, but basically, how visceral and alive can you make it? That was great. So those experiences are really, really important, and you kind of, I don't know. There are things like Conservatory is a play that I wrote relatively recently, and it has certain things in it that hark back to the very first thing I wrote. It's two people and two chairs, and it's very much a text-based play. But there's a couple of sequences in it that are purely physical theatre that I probably wouldn't have had the nerve to write if I hadn't had that experience of working with great physical performers in Annie, and the possibility of like you just a body in space, a performer standing there, looking at something and telling you something that they see, and you see it, and to that is the magic, really. I mean, I think that's the purest form of it all.
Yeah, I mean, but let's talk then about, say, the Corn Exchange and kind of your work with Annie in there. So, like, I suppose there's, like, it ranges back. I mean, obviously, the Corn Exchange and the Abbey, this year, I keep saying last year, as in pre-COVID, is kind of this year. But it kind of goes back to what was the first one? Was Car Show kind of the first play? Was that kind of, or was Foley?
In terms of the Corn Exchange, I mean, again, that was very much Annie setting up a vehicle for her own interest in performance as a performer as well as the director. And I wasn't, it wasn't promised that I could be involved. I was allowed to, drive her to things, and pick her up and stuff. But so she did Cultural Shopping in '95. She did Streetcar in '96, Big Bad Wolf in '98. And then in the middle of that, we did Two Chairs. Again, we needed something to tour, and so we kind of said, and Two Chairs is how I met Annie in the first place. She'd seen it, and she'd always wanted to perform in it. I don't think she particularly wanted to perform in it with me, but we couldn't get Dominic, so I ended up doing it. So we performed it in New York and Edinburgh and a few places, and we talked about what we wanted to do. So we did the Seagull and stuff. So I suppose we did 4 or 5 shows, and I was involved in about half of them. By about that stage. So, but again, Annie was running workshops. I'd be in them. That's how we met people like Bennett. And that was '93. So that was very much that time that Barabbas came out. We emerged. Bedrock were coming around. So there was that little kind of poof of sudden activity, and that was an exciting kind of sense of like loads of things were possible then.
Yeah. And then kind of around the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a run then, of Foley, Lolita, there was a lot of Dublin.
We did the Seagull, in '99, and that was the first time we got money. We got 20 grand, and I think that worked out as, we did it in the Mint, and that was the first time we got money, and that seemed like that was a really amazing moment of, that we can do a show, actually do it. And we actually just watched the video. We've been sort of going through archive stuff, and we watched the video of that original production, and it was kind of amazing to watch. It's a wonderful cast: Clara Simpson and Bennett and David Pearce. And it was great because I have a memory of that, but I obviously haven't seen it for all that time, and to see it again and go, okay, so it's a video and everything from the 20th century, but still it has what we were trying to do in it. It was, I thought, it held up really well in terms of our memory of the experience and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. And then, yes, so always the role of the adaptation thing for me was that it was a way to keep working. And also you get to shadow the great writer. So with Lolita, again, I don't think the Abbey would have entered a co-production with Corn Exchange on the play by me, but they were okay. Yeah, Lolita is a pretty good title, and we got to work with Ruth Negga. And so I'm very grateful, and I think the adaptations, it's a complicated game and everything keeps changing, but that was a very helpful part of it was a space where Annie and I could meet our work without having to feel that she was having to do my plays or something. I was able to help out with something that she wanted to do. It was that kind of so that was how we kind of learned to work together, was cutting other people's texts. So when it came to my stuff and getting it butchered, I mean, it's a pretty extreme experience working with Annie. But the thing was, like, I'd seen what she'd done to Tennessee Williams and Albee and, Chekhov and Nabokov. Like they took it, you should have seen what they did to them, so, and I could see then, that's a brilliant education as well, that it doesn't hurt to cut someone else's text.
Yeah.
It's just words, right? So, and you can see then if it works or if it doesn't work, something has to go back in, or that's. So I think, again, that's a very helpful displacement. It's a very healthy way of looking at and learning how to butcher your own text. So, because it's a very brutal thing, theatre. It's really, it really hurts. But as I always say to people sitting out, like, nothing hurts as much as something that you got through all the censors, went on stage and died. That is on you. And there is absolutely nothing like that like kind of dead sound of that doesn't work.
Yeah. And come here, was Dublin by Lamplight then the first? Was that the first experience of that? It
was a first experience of the vision that Annie had for the company was of an ensemble creating complex, emotionally rich, diverse casts, you know. And she had discovered that, again, because she didn't actually have the content for that, that if you took it off the peg kind of classic of naturalistic drama, that worked really well with Commedia, that it was sort of like a Bunsen burner under naturalistic drama. But one of the things that we talked about from the workshops was that, you know, Annie is an extraordinary facilitator and leader of this stuff, but the workshops are insane, right? They are extremely grotesque, and, you know, there is nothing there's nothing that is taboo, and, you know, it is eye-popping, right, how vulgar it is. Now, it's all fake, obviously, in the sense that it's mimed, but that even allows, you know, that offers all sorts of possibilities for obscenity, and it's a base form, right? So one of the things that we noticed was that there was this huge gap between the absolute filth of the workshop world and then these, you know, they thought they were very dramatic, but ultimately quite staid and careful naturalistic dramas. So we were talking about, well, what's the in-between ground? I mean, what would a play look like that would take that kind of energy from the workshop and yet still have some of the kind of the good things that come with a well-made play? And we couldn't really think of one. So the obvious thing was that we'll have to kind of design something to those specifications. So Double Lamplight came out of that. We were going to have a long development process. We would start from scratch. And the premise was, in case anyone hadn't heard of it or seen of it, but it was basically 2004 was the sort of a double centenary. It was the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Abbey, our national theatre, but it's also the fictional centenary of Bloomsday, of the day in which Ulysses is set. So we thought, oh, that's a clever matchup. It's a nice rhyme. So we could do the story of the National Theatre of Ireland and tell it as the story of a single day. So that was a really simple hook to understand. And then I talked earlier about the yin and yang, but the polarities that you need to kind of create forward movement, a sense that you're borrowing this energy and that energy and putting them together. And the sort of problem that we set ourselves was a dramatic problem. Rather than, again, confronted with like, make a play, what'll it be? You know, the answer is always, oh, I don't know. So you're trying to find out what you do know and trying to displace that anxiety into practical things. So in this case, it was a very practical problem, which was, can we combine the balls out Commedia energy, which is great for face out, mask, drums, footlights, music, that kind of energy, and combine that with story theatre. And story theatre, again, is more like Jack Fell Down. So it's that world of, you know, using third-person narration to conjure up narratives where the actor is not the character. The actor is clearly standing aside and narrating stuff. And so, I was learning how to play both those keys, as it were. And, you know, we thought, okay, well, that would be kind of fun because there's things you can do in story theatre that are really amazing. So you can go anywhere and characters can describe entire worlds. You know, you can conjure it up with a nice sentence, a flick of the wrist, and suddenly we have a world created. So it's very efficient narratively. So we did a workshop in December 2003 with Jessica Debus, who's a great teacher and director from Chicago, a friend of Annie's, and we were in a room with some wonderful actors, and it was really simple. I mean, after about an hour, we went like, yes, you can do those two things. That's why we were doing fairy tales. So we did that, and that was great because we had a language for the piece then. So that's a nice mix there. That incorporates writing in the sort of story theatre aspects and also the base improvisation elements. And then cut to a couple of weeks later, we did a month-long workshop with the greats, Mark O'Halloran and Janet Moore and Louis Lovett, Tom Murphy, and we devised basically got about 2/3 of the way through a kind of a block story, but we just kind of threw it all on the ground and made up stuff. So we were all learning how you would make ensemble comedy and drama and tragedy, and, you know, so you don't know what it is you're looking for exactly, but it's sort of like it's somewhere in there, and then I went away and wrote it, and we came back in November, performed it, and, you know, tweaked it and all that stuff. But that was an amazing experience. That was like, that's what I thought that it would be like in a way. But I wouldn't have had the language when I started, you know, 15 years before that, starting making plays. And at that stage, I'd probably written about 20 odd shows. And you're starting to get a sense of how these things work. And that was, for me, that was a formative moment of like, that's ours. That's not anybody else's. That there's something that we're doing here that is really ourselves. And, you know, the energy of like Janet and Mark and Louis in particular, like, they're extraordinary performers, and you're trying to chase after them. It's not quite the right word, but you're trying not to get in the way of the immense creativity that people like that have. And then the point is always with Annie is like, what are the audience getting out of this? Can they see it? Can they feel it? Does it take an audience somewhere good? So it's always about that. Like, what is this going to be like to experience all that stuff? So it was very exhilarating and very exciting time.
And you mentioned there though, with your own process, that kind of, because your work is hugely collaborative. You're talking about adaptations being collaborative with the canon, and then obviously your work with Corn Exchange in a lot of guys is extraordinary collaborative as well. But like, how do you? I say it was a fascinating process to kind of then bring that back to a room by yourself. You know what I mean? To kind of bring those materials. Is there kind of, is that a, when
I think so, yeah. But that's like, again, I mean, a musical analogy where, like, you might want to go acoustic for a little while. Like there's pleasures in the whole thing, but sometimes you just feel like, I just want to write something that's very small. That's this. So that would be. I've written. I mean, this is the shocking thing, of course, as well, is that you follow your instincts, right? So I've written, sadly, several plays that have never been performed because I couldn't sell them to anyone. And they were very important to me because they were proof that I was a committed writer, and that, like, I was writing a play first and I would sell it later. But I wrote this historical epic about the gunpowder plot. Spent all this time researching it. I wrote it. I think it's fantastic. But I mean, I've shown it to a few people, but there's no way. It's like, you could do it with a minimum of 14 people, but it would be great if you had 25. It's historical. It's about all that stuff. So it's very funny. I mean, you had, I remember Nicholas Heitner in the National saying, where are the big plays? Where are the historical plays? And I went like, I wrote one and sent it to you, and you said, we don't want to do it. So there's a lot of that stuff going on. But I think, so you're at the mercy of your instinct at that level. But for me, that was a very important project to have written from the beginning to end, going, I have no idea who would do this, but this is what I want to write. And the great thing about, as I say, the work with the Corn Exchange is that it's got done. I mean, like, I think there's maybe one and a half Corn Exchange shows that didn't make it, that I was involved with. There's always a bunch, but I don't know what the hit rate is. I'd love to talk to other people about that, but I mean, like, maybe half the things you write would get done, and you consider yourself very lucky if you got half your stuff. I mean,
I think that's kind of something maybe the general public kind of don't realize, is that, obviously writers get commissioned to write work, or obviously work with collaborators towards an end. But writers also write, so they write something that they're interested in exploring that might never see the light of day for many, many different reasons. Yeah,
well, you're always pitching. Like, Fall of the Second Republic was an idea that I would have pitched, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years ago. Now, it wasn't a very long full version, but the central germ of the thing was right there. And that was on the back of Dub My Lamplight, because I was, so excited by that format. And I was thinking I'd like to follow that, the children or maybe the grandchildren of those characters and see where it ended up. So I had the title and the name of Manny Spillane and the basic kind of action. But yeah, a good 10, 12 years ago. And I pitched it a few times, and it usually, you can tell instantly, this is not floating here. This is not going to happen. And because we got to do Dub My Lamplight again in the Abbey in 2017, on the back of that, I went in and I pitched three things to them. One was an adaptation of a novel. One was this amazing historical play about the gunpowder plot, which I had already written. And one was this play I hadn't written a word of, The Fall of the Second Republic, and pitched it. And the thing that, again, when I'm talking about this with people, is part of the trick, if you want to call it that, in getting work done, is you've got to make the producers fall in love with their own idea. And they will always be more interested in the thing that hasn't been done yet, that they have a role in creating and facilitating by saying yes to, at the very least. But that's always more exciting. So it's very important to keep that open. I mean, like, as I say, I've been writing for over 30 odd years. And that was one of the very few occasions I remember thinking, like, I handled that perfectly. I had 3 projects. They covered exactly mapped out terrain. I would have happily done any of them. Like, I'm not fussy. But I knew I was giving them a really strong suite of options. And they, of course, I suppose, went for let's do the one that no one else has done and hasn't been done. And, so that was the green light, I suppose, in 2017. And these things always take longer than you think. But so that was, I can't remember how I got into this part of the conversation, but
You were talking about the transition from kind of writing for yourself, or writing, developing work for yourself rather than to a mission or to a project. And I suppose, like, working back from 17 back through, there was then a lot of collaborations with, with a Corn Exchange, around Everyday Freefall, there's the Extraordinary Man of Valor, and Dubliners then that in a way merge both in some ways. I mean, I know you've done that before, you've done work up to Chekhov and that's before, but that kind of hit back into something that was kind of there a decade ago, and that. Yeah. But I think I think what's not, I think what's maybe not spoken about your work and with Corn Exchange and enough, and your work generally, is the kind of the great Irishness in it, or the great kind of linkage to our culture, and both, and I mean that both within, obviously, you're Irish, but also, our historical culture and our frames of kind of reference, and that's something, it gets very much there in, say, the fall of the Second Republic and kind of Dubliners, but even the way Man of Valor is kind of the language around that. So I think that's something that really has always hit home for me about your writing, that even though you've worked in, the European canon and in new work, it's very Irish, and I mean that in the broadest sense.
Yeah, well, that's interesting to hear. I mean, obviously, as an Irish person, it's going to come out in some form or other. I mean, particularly those ones. I mean, Dublin by Lamplight and Second Republic are kind of like a diptych, simply because they're both concerned with nationhood and the politics of theatre and the theatre of politics. That was like a natural map. But things like Foley, which we did with Andrew Bennett in about 2000, 2001, and Man of Valor with Paul Reed. I mean, they're looking at an Ireland now, even if it's through a lens, different lenses. In those cases, Foley's through text and through memory, and Man of Valor is through a kind of panicked nightmare without text. I mean, that was all coming from Paul. As he came up with the character in one of the workshops, and I don't know if Annie was explaining how that came about, but that was very interesting, because that's always, again, we're talking about, those workshops are such kind of generative powerhouses. So even though they're chaotic and it's a mess, it's not like, trying to come up with something finished or anything, but there are sometimes you see things. I can still remember, entire sequences done 15, 20, 30 years ago in workshops, because they had that kind of luminous quality of something being discovered. And Paul Reed did this extraordinary improvisation. It was from a technical game called Hook Up and Activate that Annie was teaching, and the idea was that an actor enters the space, finds the location. Don't think of it first and go in and find out what the location is, and make contact with an object in the space. And this is all mimed, of course. So now Paul happens to be ridiculously talented that way, but it's not a mime exercise. You can literally be touching an imaginary table and leaving, but you do make contact with something in the space. That calls another actor in, and the scene goes until the second actor touches the object or makes contact with an object in that space again, and then out they go. So it's simply a way of creating a kind of a relay race of adding to elements and stuff. So it's really simple, and it can be played at any level. And it shouldn't take that long, and it's a warm-up exercise. Anyway, Paul Reed starts off, and he goes in and he finds he's in this office, and things start happening and going wrong, and things start exploding, and he's up there for about 20 odd minutes, and every so often his eyes would come out to the audience like, who's coming up here next? And everyone else is going like, I'm not going in there. And he was there, and like walls were exploding and the floor was collapsing, and he was being shot by arrows, and at one point the entire back wall broke, and the aquarium broke through, and there were sharks, and he was swimming around, and he just was riffing the whole thing, and it ended, and he went like, that was great, well, that's a show. And that was the show. In a way, it was a really simple thing of like, that guy is great, whoever that guy is. Why is he so worried? What's his problem? So it came very much out of like, well, Paul is the only person who could do it. So what is that thing? So that was a fascinating experience. And for me, that was interesting as a writer again, because I was excited at the idea of there may not be anybody else in it. We don't know yet. There may not be any text in it, but I still wanted to write it. And I would say to anyone, very happy, like I wrote as many drafts for that as I have for anything in my life. It was really challenging, because you have to really, I don't know, I had to learn my craft a whole new way that way, actually. And particularly that one was, we pitched it as, I thought it was, again, a great pitch, which was a one-man action movie. And then quickly realized I know nothing about how you put together an action movie. What is that? And so having to, you've consumed them and enjoyed them over the years, but what does that mean? And anyway, so those kind of problems were really exciting, and so we had to kind of educate ourselves in terms of what that would be. So it was a very exciting journey, and that was very much. And read-throughs are really weird in that world, because they're treatments, I suppose, is what you're reading, and how do you even talk about this? So Paul would draw pictures, and I would go on about something, and Annie would talk about something and then go in and write another draft and come back in. But of course, and the amazing thing was, of course, knowing that Paul could do any of this stuff. So I was writing more and more complicated scenes basically for him to do, and he would read them and go, "But what is this exactly?" And and I was thinking, well, I think it would just be cool if you could do all that stuff. And he would start off doing a bit, but you go yeah. The question though is why? Always in drama, it's like, why are they doing stuff? What is it? Why though? So that was very exciting.
And in that, I suppose around that time as well, and in the last kind of decade, you've done stuff that I didn't realize actually before I kind of looked you up to see what I was going to be chatting to you about. Was we're adapting Canterville Ghosts for the English.
Yeah.
I mean that, how did that work?
Well, that was great. Again, these things are it's a bit of a mystery, but I think again, a lot of the time, what people think writers do is quite alarming, and people in the industry. They're very straight idea. So in the case of the English National Ballet, what happened was it was my agent put me in contact with a choreographer, Will Tuckett, who was an ex-Royal Ballet dancer, and he had just started setting out on his own. And what happened was they were looking to get young people involved, and they were excited about, how can you modernize ballet? And the idea that they had in their mind was that you would get a writer in and a famous actor to do a bit of a voiceover. That's what they thought writing was. So, and the Canterville Ghost is an Oscar Wilde short story, which has actually a sort of a strange history as a piece of, I not quite call it amateur ballet, but it's often been performed, versions of it have been performed with young companies, and so it was a text that was supposed to appeal to young people. Now, it's quite a slight, bizarre story. But I was approached, would I be interested in doing it? And I had a long meeting with Will, and I said I would, but I'm not interested in the voiceover at all. In my mind, coming from my background now this is before Man of Valor, in fact, we did it, but I said in my mind, I would love to write a ballet and not have any text whatsoever, that I would be helping out the story element. Because what little I know nothing about ballet, but I can't follow the stories. I'm curious about the problems of the format. How can you tell a story? And what are the challenges and what are the opportunities and stuff like that. So Will was very cool with that. But the English National Ballet weren't. They were expecting us to have, where's all the text? So we came up with a compromise, which was I wrote a voiceover for Tom Baker to record, which he did. So he was the voice of the ghost. So that came over, and it was all a bit Little Brittany, but absolutely fine. But what I really did was I got to write out the storyline. So I got to make the treatment and block it down in scenes and stuff like that. And, I did obviously in consultation with Will, and he thought that was brilliant because, again, from a choreography point of view, he knew now what the story beats were, who the characters were, because there's a lot of that time to talk about his particular ensemble, this corps de ballet that he was using. They had certain types of performers, and so I was able to talk to him about how many of these characters can you cast then from that? Can we do something a bit more interesting? So it was a very interesting experience, and it's just also extraordinary to be in a room with ballet dancers. I mean, it's as close to the RDS horse show or something as I can imagine. To sit in a room like that and these tiny people absolutely galumphing and thumping and leaping and landing, and I just hadn't realized, a bit like with the horses, the physical effort is obvious, but of course when you see it in a theater far away, it's hidden. That's the whole point. But when you're in a rehearsal room, you can smell and hear the noise of breathing, the sweat, it's an extraordinary physical thing. So it was absolutely, amazing experience.
And then obviously you worked and another kind of adaptation kind of, I think they're co-writing rather than, I think I think they're co-writing with people who may not be here anymore. So the Frankenstein spelled weirdly with Taylor Lovett as well.
Yeah.
And I think that was very interesting, I suppose, push out for them in being a kind of darker, you know, a more, well, I suppose it's a natural progression actually for their work, but kind of, you know, pushed into another arena, and maybe yourself kind of revisiting that, you know, not childlike, but that kind of work for potentially, you know, not a younger audience, but with a company who would have had feet in that place. Was that a really interesting experience to work on that type of work, you know, outside the Corn Exchange as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like I love Louis, and I've wanted to write something for him since we worked together on Dublin Lamplight. So I have pitched him a good few ideas, to which he still hasn't responded. But it was an ongoing thing, you know. I would say, I'd love to write you something. And then we had a conversation, I think it was when we were doing the Seagull for the theatre festival, and Louis was in that. And I was talking to him about, it's one of these, again, these are very strange things that actually turn the corner, I suppose, in terms of what's possible. So I had pitched him an idea of a show about a mad scientist. And I think it was based on Prometheus. Louis loves the Greek thing. Like, he loves Greek myths, and he's interested in Greece, and he speaks a bit of Greek. And, you know, so that was interesting. So this was an idea from years before, Prometheus, and I'd written it up and pitched it, and, you know, nothing came of it. And we were having lunch during rehearsals for the Seagull, and I was talking, I don't know why it came up in my mind, but I was obsessed with the idea of framing. How you frame a project, you know, dictates so many of the things that happen within that frame. I mean, it's not really that amazing an observation, but I was just talking about it in the context of something else, and he stopped me and he said, "What do you mean by framing?" And I said, "Okay, well, what I mean by that is literally how you frame the content changes the way everyone else can see it. I mean, that's exactly what I mean by it." And he said, "For example," I said, "Oh, for example, the Prometheus project that I pitched to you a couple of years ago, which is about a scientist who's trying to recreate life." And I said, if I call that Frankenstein, that changes everything about how you see and what's going on." And he went, "I just have to call Murren 1 second." So he just went off, and he came back and says, "Let's do that." And it was almost like a simple click like that, because that is that moment of, it was that project which had meant nothing to him when it was called Prometheus. And Frankenstein had answered all of the things that he had been looking for in a totally different area of work, which was they needed a title, an out of copyright title, something that could appeal to younger audiences, but clearly wasn't for younger audiences. All these things. So they had a list of things, and then just by renaming it, and of course the title of Frankenstein is the modern Prometheus. So I knew, and again, from that moment, like I knew exactly what we were going to do with that, and we went ahead. So yeah, it was a lovely experience working with them. But like, again, Louis, as a technician, it's extraordinary to work with an actor who they can do absolutely anything. So it's important, I suppose, like with any project, it doesn't really matter even what your particular skills are. It's just that you have a good working knowledge of what might be useful for this project. So Louis' thing was like short. Having performed thousands of shows for young audiences, sometimes doing 2 or 3 shows a day, you know, he said, like, please be short. I'm not going to do this twice a day, but as short as possible. So I said, how short? And he said, under 6,000 words, please. And his thing was like, other actors will use 12,000 words. I only need 6. I'm going to act and do my thing in the others, you know, where the other 6,000 words would have been and stuff. And I know very well from working with him what he means by that. So again, I was able to address that idea of like, well, I can create space for you in these things, and I can try to, anyway. So all that stuff. So I wrote, you know, very long first version that probably terrified him. But I mean, the project was from the beginning described to be, as long as it was in that way, would be Louis and stuff. So we're doing it again, possibly the end of this year. We're supposed to be touring it again, so that'll be great. And then if it doesn't work.
I won't keep it much longer, but I'm interested in, I'll go back to the Irish piece around, because it occurs to me, like, say from Dublin by Lamplight straight through to the fall of the Second Republic, there's a you know, a moment, a turn of the century kind of timing, or a turn, or a kind of turn of an epoch. So yeah, in the fall of the Second Republic, you're into a space where Ireland was, you know, or the fictional Ireland was emerging into a new kind of potentially very dodgy or even more dodgier space. But back through like Dubliners and Dublin by Lamplight, you're back in the Joycean period, and it's funny, they mirror each other really interestingly. The kind of the frustration, I suppose, about things not changing.
Yeah.
With all these people with so much energy trying to change things, but they kind of just end up. And there's an awful lot of that kind of a thing, which is very exciting about your work, is that showing people's potential by the amount of energy they contain and the amount of dreams they can have, but actually they don't end up going anywhere. It just kind of it explodes.
Yeah.
You know, and that as an audience looking at it is kind of both sad in an empathetic way, but also very exciting. And you know, I mean, it reaches the zenith with Man of Valor, because the whole fucking thing just explodes. But that sense, even in the fall of the Second Republic, you know, with the character of with Andrew Bennett's character, I mean, that's ready to, you know, that could have gone a whole different road and could in the future of the play. Similarly, with the characters in Dublin by Lamplight, the rabbit holes they bring us down, you know, in their kind of physical manifestation. Is that something that interests you, Michael, in relation to what happens beyond what's going on the stage at that moment in time? Or, you know, is that a very long question?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer, only because I don't know. I mean, I can see when you're describing it, I can see that as a theme. I mean, the way it normally expresses itself would be in terms of what genre are these pieces, because you know they're like, and there's something interesting. I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is, but like they're not comedies, but they're not quite tragedies either. They are. There's a comedic energy that is used for savage purposes, but I don't think they're satires, because again, in the case of something like Dublin by Lamplight, there's a purity to their dreaming that is not, you know, there's no satirical impulse in ours. So Second Republic is different, because we're used to mocking our political overlords. But again, so I think of it almost as like, how do those things work? The comedy tragedy thing, and is it another form? Is it, you know, dramedy or something like that? So it's a different way of looking at the same thing, of like, you're looking to use laughter and the comedic potential of dreaming and hope, and then crashing it against the horrible reality of what these lives are. And I think that there's something about, you have to honor the pain of lived experience that way. Like, there are no cheap, you know, there's cheap gags, but there's no happy endings. And so that is, I suppose, a common theme. I mean, again, that's very much, I think, that's a marriage of like Annie's artistic impulse and my own, that she really loves the dark and goes for the dark, and I find that it's not all bad. Even if it goes horribly wrong, there's still possibilities within that journey. But yes, I can see, yes, certainly if you look at them like that. I mean, the Dubliners is a good example, because it was an amazing opportunity to have a go at that for the theatre festival. But largely because that was the secret book behind Dublin by Lamplight. So we had looked at those stories, and we had thought about how you would do kind of that interweaving ensemble narrative and stuff. Now, in fact, I think when we did Dubliners, we got about 2/3 of the way. So we got to do it again with the Lear a couple of years later, and we kind of rounded that corner and were able to do it. We'd finish what we were trying to do in terms of making that ensemble thing knit together in a much more flexible way. But yeah, it's very interesting. And then Every Day was another example where that was definitely ensemble storytelling of a short story collection, as it were. And we didn't want to do that with Second Republic. That was very much just the two worlds to flip between them. So
that's a great phrase, that purity of their dreaming. And I think there's a lot in that phrase. You know, there's a lot kind of obviously about both the dark and the kind of light. Just talk to me before I let you go in relation to, you know, you in the room and you not, because some writers, I mean, obviously, you know, in the work that you do, that's collaborative. But do you know, say, is it important to you to be in the room with your text?
The rule of thumb is, the more welcome you are in the room, the less you need to go. So I think, I mean, you can't litigate that stuff. Once you get into any kind of, well, my rights, your rights stuff, it's too late. It's all over. So I think the advantage of, you know, the experience that I've had with Annie and the Corn Exchange and the ensemble working with those people is that everyone has seen each other with their pants down, metaphorically, in that sense. Like, and so, you know, everyone is fucked up at some point, with the writing or the acting or the directing. Like, everyone makes mistakes. So the environment that you're looking for is a world where you go, yes, and here's what we're going to do next, rather than just like, that's the end of the process. So, I mean, I would have a different approach to this. You know, Annie would much rather I came in with a perfect draft and we just have the rehearsal period to do it. But I keep saying to her, it's like, that's actually not what you want. You don't want to finish thing. And I talk about this with Lenny Abrahamson, with something like Adam and Paul. Like, you know, Lenny has been offered nice scripts and probably is every day, but he's not something he's looking for. He's looking for something that's not quite finished, so that he has a space to do his thing. And I think that all creative artists are like that. Like, if it's too finished, there's no room for you. So in the case of the ensemble work, the appeal is you're talking to the actors that you want to work with before it's been ruined. You know, it's that pure dreaming thing. You're trying to get people's involvement at that early stage, and that's helpful, you know, to me as a writer, to know that they're interested. But I also know that, like, I'm going to write something that fits them perfectly. They're not going to be suddenly having to do something that doesn't work with them. So you're then, you know, egging each other on. Yeah. So so where was I going with this? In terms of being welcome in the room. So I don't know, there's also a technical onus on you as a writer. So, like, you've got to finish this stupid thing, you know, so that there's a draft that you can read. You can tear it apart and rewrite every single word, but you've got to at least present something. And then the understanding is, like, yes, if we're going to change every single word of this, then we will. So with the Second Republic was, you know, pretty grueling in terms of, we would do a reading, I would go home, cook, feed everyone, and then work until 3 or 4 in the morning and send the pages to Annie, and then she would go in and do those ones, and then that would go. That was a very extreme version, but that's partly because of the time pressure we were under. But it's not different from anything else. I mean, that's just how you do it. I don't know. So you can't be defending yourself is really what I'm getting at. In a rehearsal room, you have to just see what happens.
Yeah, no, I hear you.
Accept that. And you can change stuff. But again, you also don't want to be punishing an actor for screwing up a line. I mean, they just maybe didn't get it, they read it wrong, or they're thinking about something else. You can't be too paranoid. You know, I remember, like, you know, again, if you talk to any writers, like, the first read through of a script on the first day is a harrowing experience, simply because, you know, you realize as a writer, quite, you know, it takes a couple of goes, you realize, like, the actors aren't thinking about you. They're going, like, what's my bit? And they're in a whole other game of pain, you know, with that thing. And, you know, the idea that you could suddenly get a perfect reading of that, I don't know, it's all very interesting. But obviously do your work as much as possible beforehand. This is actually just, again, a practical thing, and it's one of the great things about working with Annie. The Coin Change was, like, the worst way to make a play is to start on the Monday of the first day of rehearsals and try and rewrite it, and you're still opening it in 4 weeks. Doesn't matter how much you rewrite or don't rewrite. The rule of rewrites is it takes longer and longer to change less and less. That will happen no matter what time you start working on it, but it costs nothing to change a play a year beforehand in terms of emotional effort. You go, well, that just doesn't work, so we'll fix it. But, you know, if you're going to go into a first preview in 2 days, it's we can change it. And this is, again, a common thing for all theatre makers, that, you know, for you to cut a minute out of a play might take you an hour, and you don't have that hour when you come to previews. That minute has to stay in that dead minute of that. You know, it's not just a simple cut from there to there. It's like there's a whole lot of other things going on there. So that's a nightmare. So great thing about working with the Coin Change was, you know, we kept arguing to the Arts Council and to all our funders and stuff like that. This is an efficient way to do it, but we would go from a week workshop in December, a 4-week workshop in February, March, a reading and maybe a day or two in June, another reading in sort of September, and then go into rehearsals in October. Like, you can change things over that period of time. You can't change them tonight.
Yeah.
You know, that's really hard. You've cast somebody, and you don't have the freedom. Like, you know, again, with Commedia, people can play different parts and all that stuff, but, you know, you're building up a whole lot of problems the later you do in that stuff. That's all.
You've worked in radio. You've done some bits for radio. Is that something that I mean, obviously Foley, you know, kind of the play wasn't for radio, but it kind of it's in that world of. But, like, is the non-visual aspect of work that in?
Yeah, it's radio is beautiful. I mean, I wish I knew more about it. But again, as a writer, you know, I'll write for anything. There are things about radio that are very exciting for a writer. You can do anything in a really simple way, like because you don't have the set. So you can, I'm interested in that idea of like both going inside a character, going back in time, going out into the world. Those things are really fluid and beautiful. And, we don't have a huge tradition of great radio drama, and I certainly wouldn't be an expert in it, but there are amazing radio plays out there. And it's very filmic compared to theatre, certainly. It feels a lot more filmic. And the sort of the innovations over the last 20 years in terms of location recording and lapel mics, and you can improvise and move, like it really is filmic. You can do documentary style stuff. So those things are very exciting. So I'm trying to work on something at the moment, but like, yeah, if there was more of a market for it, I would definitely be doing more. It's an immensely flexible and beautiful medium for sure.
You mentioned filmic there. Does that medium interest you?
Yeah. I mean, it's not for want of trying. It just my particular suite of gifts hasn't met with like I've written a few screenplays, like everybody, but that's, again, I don't know, like I'm old to be getting into that game, and how do you start? Who do you know? I mean, I suppose I know loads of people, but it's a different game.
Yeah.
But no, I love it. I mean, of course, we all we consume film in a way that, and TV now is the kind of the gold standard thing. But yeah, we consume vast quantities of it, and it's both feeding off the work that people do in theatre and all the other art forms, and then inspiring it and reconnecting back into it. So there are very interesting developments in terms of long form storytelling, ensemble storytelling that are talking to each other. TV is a really good example of what's now possible in terms of storytelling. So that's all. Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, for sure.
I mean, kind of, we're ending where we kind of started out the way, because back when we were younger, series would maybe last 10 episodes, or there'd be long kind of sitcoms that would have series, or there wasn't these 10-week, hour-long series. But if there was, they were once a year. Do you know what I mean? They were the big drama on RTE or on the BBC. Now there's dozens of them available at any one time, with people who are at the top of it. I mean, TV back then was seen as, some ways, for those that weren't only going to ever work in it, it was seen as a stepping stone into Hollywood or kind of film.
Yeah.
But now it's nearly become the other way around, as kind of the people at the top of their game are kind of in that, it's fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, the standard is extraordinary, but again, that's largely because of control, that the showrunners and the creators get to actually have control that they wouldn't have with film, and you can control all these kinds of things. But yeah, no, I mean, that storytelling it's outstanding. I mean, like, you could list loads of, the shocking thing from the writing point of view is what's happening is the expectation on the writer to come up with a show Bible and a 10-hour storyline before you even get in the door is now, that's now moving up the thing. So it's not enough to write an hour and a half. You have to write 10 hours in your head at least, and to have something that's robust. They're also commissioning a lot more, and then they're acting a lot more. So it's no joke. You're looking at the very top of the stuff. I mean, that the stuff that's good is astonishingly good, but it's at the top of a huge iceberg of material. Yeah, well, again, like, you hear this thing of like, they're always looking for content. They're looking for content. They're just not looking for your content. Like, it's, but they're looking for content. A machine, yeah, for sure.
Come here, and how are you finding, I mean, just for anyone that finds this kind of in years to come, we're in the emergence space, hopefully, of kind of a lockdown period from the coronavirus pandemic, and how have you found that yourself? How have you kind of, has it been a creative space for you, or has it been a kind of living? It's
a bit of both, yeah. Apart from the existential dread of losing your livelihood and all hope, it's been, it's been quite pleasant. Yeah, it's weird. I mean, in terms of my life, COVID is fascinating because, like, welcome to my world is what I feel like saying. Like, I work from home at my kitchen table. I live with uncertainty, and I'm not sure if anyone will ever do anything ever again. Like, that's quite normal. I mean, this is obviously a whole other game where you're looking at devastation of the entire sector. But I mean, for me, my daily routine is the same. It's just there's all these people in my house, so it's really annoying. But I mean, we're lucky in that, like, we haven't had to deal with any tragedy. We've just been able to kind of hunker down and engage with it. I mean, like, yes, I've been reading and writing furiously just to delay the existential 4 a.m. moments as much as possible. if you'd said to me, and I basically had given up, I assumed that was it. Like everyone has lost 6 months to a year's work that's just gone, and the theatres won't open till Christmas if everything works out well. And I was actually in rehearsal last week for the first time, and like if you said to me 2 weeks ago I'd be in a rehearsal room, I wouldn't have believed you. So my entire outlook has changed in terms of I'm seeing, well, maybe it is possible. I don't know what that is going to look like, but so that's been a huge thing, because I suppose being in a rehearsal room and being slightly bored by a rehearsal and feeling this is a really uncomfortable chair and when are we going to have tea, that the pleasure of that was extraordinary. Like, to be slightly bored in a rehearsal room again. I mean, I never thought I would miss that, and I also hadn't admitted to myself quite the extent to which I had been just terrified that would never happen. I mean, like, March 12th, it all went away. And again, I was at the show March 11th in the Abbey, and I had no idea that was going to be the last one, I mean, I'd said to Annie, I had said to her, so I don't think we're going to get to finish our run in our first week of rehearsals. I was certain that we'd get pulled. So I was amazed that we got to open. And then I was thinking, well, maybe just the way Ireland works, they'll cut it down on the Friday or Saturday, and we'll have finished our run instead. And anyway, as everyone knows, it just went ahead. But mostly, yes, if you're thinking about it in the future, mostly I was grateful to be in this country and not in other countries. That's my overwhelming feeling. And to be in my community, where I missed not seeing them, but I really value them, and that sense of, like, I don't know how we as a community will survive, but being away from them is helpful for reminding you of how much love and esteem there is for the whole sector, and how much we need each other. So that's been interesting.
Yeah. Michael, I'm going to leave you at that. It's a lovely way to finish, and thanks very, very much for taking part in this. It's been an absolute joy, and I can't wait to maybe have a pint or a couple with you when we're all allowed back into pubs without having to buy meals.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right, cheers, man. Thanks a million.
Cheers, Mark. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All the best.